Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a scalable, full-stack monitoring platform. Datadog synthetic monitoring enables you to detect front-end errors and performance errors by analyzing user sessions and receiving actionable alerts. API tests help you detect and debug user-facing issues in critical endpoints and applications. Build and deploy self-maintaining browser tests to simulate user journeys from global locations. Start proactively monitoring your user experience today with a free 14-day trial of Datadog by visiting datadog.com/frontend-cloudcast. That's datadog.com/frontend-cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it is July, which means we are halfway through the year, which means it's time for our mid-year 2023 update. If you are new to the show or just unfamiliar with it, we take this time every year, specifically this week, which is Independence Day, July 4th here in the United States. We take this time to do a little bit of look back at the first half of the year, as well as what we're looking forward to in the second half of the year. And has also become maybe a little bit of a tradition here. Brandon Whichard from the Software Defined Talk podcast joins us on this one. I had a schedule conflict at the last moment, so wasn't able to attend, but Brian and Brandon do an excellent job. And so with that, we're going to jump right into that, and it's coming up right after the break.
Introducing G-Core Managed Kubernetes, the ultimate solution for streamlined Kubernetes management. Experience support for bare metal nodes and a robust 99.9 uptime SLA at no extra cost. Provision Kubernetes clusters effortlessly with a single click using their intuitive dashboard, API, or Terraform. Seamlessly integrate with G-Core external DNS and easily provision block volume storage for your requirements. And of course, stay up to date with the latest Kubernetes versions. Plus, they have an exclusive offer just for you. Click the G-Core link in the show notes and use promo code CLOUDCAST and receive €100 credit to try G-Core services today. That's promo code CLOUDCAST to receive €100 credit on your G-Core services today. Are you getting pressure from finance to justify or reduce your cloud bill? CloudZero is the only cloud cost platform loved by engineers and trusted by finance. CloudZero can identify unused, idle, or over-provisioned resources, alert you to spend anomalies, and organize 100% of your spend into a framework that mirrors your business structure, like cost per customer, product feature, or team. It's the most powerful platform ever built to provide accurate, granular visibility into your total cloud spend without the typical pitfalls of legacy cloud cost management tools like endless tagging or clunky Kubernetes support. Manage cost, optimize development, and maximize profit, all in one platform. Join companies like Rapid7, Drift, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. Visit today to experience immediate and ongoing savings on your cloud bill. And we're back, and folks, as has become a tradition unlike any other, it is the MidYear show. It is middle of 2023, sort of the 4th of July timeframe, end of June, end of July. So very excited to have our good friend Brandon Whichard, who is co-host of one of our favorite Software Defined Talk. Brandon, welcome back to the show. It is not only mid-year, it's also the complete doldrums of sports. So we should have lots and lots of technology to talk about.
That's right. There's nothing for us to get off topic. There's absolutely no sports on there. And of course, I enjoy the mid-year tradition. I hope everybody is by the pool or on vacation, surviving the heat. And so hopefully we'll provide plenty of hot takes to entertain them for a few minutes.
That's right. And we can go along with this one because people, like you said, people are, they've got 9-hour drives for vacations or they're sitting at the pool. They're killing time.
That's right. They got nothing else to do. Listen to us.
That's right.
I love it.
By minute 40, they'll be like, all right, I've had 4 White Claws. I don't even know what these guys are talking about. So it's all good. All right, man. So we're going to talk about sort of what's been going on so far the first half of the year. And then maybe we get to the end. We'll kind of make some bold predictions or some, if we see some trends, maybe reshaping themselves. Let's start with sort of big trends and stories. What, if you had to sort of summarize maybe your big 3 stories or trends for the first half of the year, what's on your list?
Well, a couple of things. I think first we'll talk about AI in a little bit. I think, there's no way we can't mention that. That's sort of, kind of, if you will, come out of nowhere and taken over all of our lives. I think it's also worth maybe talking briefly about just how happy I am that we don't have to talk about cryptocurrency anymore. I feel like that's officially dead. So that was great. That was a good time. It wasn't actually a good time, I should say. So that it's just fun to look back at last year's and think about like, where were we? We were talking about crypto, and that's all done. So that is obviously, kind of come and gone, but certainly I kind of think of, the big trends are like a lot of talk about platform engineering, right? And I think we can get into that in a second. A lot of talk about AI. And then I think maybe kind of this like emerging discussion of like, well, lots is happening in the CNCF, lots of projects, lots of platforms, but maybe we're not going the right direction, or maybe we're like all like a little unhappy with what's happening around DevOps. So I think there's been a lot of discussion around that. So it's kind of like three trends that I've seen maybe since, the beginning of the year, and we can dive in on any one of them if you're interested.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good list. I think the other ones that I would add, I think the sort of fallout, shakeout of the economy / interest rates, we've been talking about that a lot. Kind of what that means. It seems to have sort of a rough effect on the class of unicorns, or decacorns or whatever from the last 3 or 4 years. Huge valuations, maybe not huge revenues. Will they get another round of funding? What does that mean for those sort of companies? Are we going to see a new round of acquisitions come along, whether they're vendor acquisitions or PE? You're right. The AI thing is going on. And then I think, we can kind of dive into stuff like cloud cost management. Is that, what does it look like in terms of spending? Are companies sort of end users slowing down? Are they rethinking stuff? It feels like there's a little bit of an undercurrent of like, should we be using the public cloud as much as we did, which is sort of the undercurrent of, are we spending too much on public cloud? So I feel like, I think somewhere in that 5 or 6 list is probably the big trends that everybody's been talking about. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say absolutely, and I think maybe it's just worth, because like the economy is sort of like the one everyone wants to talk about. And in fact, last time I was on the Cloudcast, we had Jam and Bell on, right? He was kind of going through all of the valuations and things like that. And I think since then, I would reaffirm what I like to say all the time is nobody knows anything, right? It was like, I felt like we were all being prepped. We're definitely going into a recession. Interest rates are definitely changing everything. And we should all be prepared for this downturn. And since then, like a lot of the stocks and these companies that we cover are like up like 20 or 30% since the beginning of the year. Obviously, AI has a lot to do with it. So this is kind of back to like, as I kind of joke there, it's just like, you just kind of never know, right? And I think a lot of us, certainly of a certain age, I'll put myself in this category, like lived through the .com implosion. So you hear a lot of people kind of talking about, well, in 2000 this happened, and kind of drawing some type of comparison, which is good. I kind of like to do that too. But then I kind of look back on it like, hey, just because it happened in 2000 doesn't mean it's going to happen the same way. So I don't know. It's sort of, as we look ahead, it's like whatever we think is going to happen probably won't happen when it comes to the economy. Right.
Well, and the other thing is, I think if you make the comparison back to 2000, and for those younger listeners that are listening, go back and Google like internet bubble or something. Basically, the same way, maybe not the same way, that we had all this VC money flow in, over the last 3 or 4 years, and there's a million new companies that popped up. Like back then, there was a million new companies that were popping up as well. The difference was a ton of those companies went public. And so you had, pets.com and all these different companies who, had a questionable business model, but they were doing it over the internet. They went public. They had a big bump, on day one. We didn't necessarily have that with all of these, startups over the last few years. So while the economy is sort of, softened, but, sort of coming back a little bit, the other thing is like, you see these things now and it's like, most of the gains in the stock market over the last 3 months or 4 months or 5 months go back to the same 5 or 6 sort of FANG companies. And you're like, we're addicted to those companies. They have tons and tons and tons of money to sort of withstand all this stuff. And yes, they hired too many people and they had some layoffs. They laid off 10,000 people or whatever, which we never want to sort of laugh off because it impacts real people. But like, they're still sitting there on $100 billion in kind of war chest money. So yeah, they've got huge moats. They're not going anywhere. The fact that everybody dumps them when their stock is a little bit soft is probably, people like Warren Buffett are sitting there going like, you're out of your mind. Just stay in the market long term. This is where the mark's going.
Absolutely. Highly profitable businesses still, no matter what anyone says, these companies are still making tons of money, to your point.
Exactly. Well, so let's sort of start, the show's called the Cloudcast. Let's start with sort of the big 3 cloud providers. What have you seen trend wise with the big three? Anything, the last few years, it feels like it was, the only analysis you really had to do was line goes up, they print money, right? Like they're all making money. They're all growing 70, 80% year over year. They'll never be stopped. They're investing in CapEx. But it does feel like there's been some shift and some differentiation between their strategies.
Yeah, without doubt. I mean, I guess we'll start with maybe the most positive. I mean, clearly Microsoft has just done Azure, right? Has just done fantastic. I think they've been all over this AI thing. They've sort of played it perfectly. They've used that to kind of, if you will, kind of reposition themselves as sort of kind of the leaders in AI with all of their investments in open AI. And of course, like, people are even saying, I think that's translating into a lot of utilization at Azure. Like we've even heard a couple of times that like the quote unquote, they're running at capacity, especially on the GPU side. So a great story there. I think, enterprises love Microsoft. They've always loved Microsoft. They continue to adopt Azure. So I would give them like, if we were ranking, I would be like A+. They've just done a great time. And of course, they've come down a little bit, but their growth rates are still really, really good. And then Google, which is sort of, I don't know, at least on our podcast, we like to make fun of sometimes, is like, when are they going to be profitable? Well, turns out they are profitable. They finally did it, right? And so I don't think there was really ever a question, right, of that happening. But I think we like to talk about it. So they're making money. I'm sure the Thomas Kurian, I'm sure his meetings with the CFO are much better now. He can show that, at least they're on the positive sides. And I think you're slowly seeing, them solidify third place and sort of, kind of continue to kind of grow. So I think you have to give them like a solid, we'll give them the B. They've done well. And then, our Hall of Famer, AWS is like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but like they've kind of stumbled right over the last few months. I think, they had the real, of course they're making the most. So again, we're grading on a heavy curve here, right? So they're the biggest, but they took a pretty big step back as far as growth. I think it was down to 14%, and they had to announce that to the street, and that sort of surprised everyone. And then I feel like, especially, I know you and I have talked about offline, remember the old Andy Jassy keynotes where he would spend almost 2 hours talking about AI to the point like it was hard to even like pay attention. And I feel like they have completely missed out. Like, I don't feel like they're in this conversation at all. I know they would say they have tons of tools and they, provide all of these utilities and services behind the scenes, but like, it's not translating to me in the sense of like, people don't think of them that way. They're not in the headlines as much. I think, they've even had a little bit of an outage there. So I don't know, like it's surprising, right? Because the company has just been so incredibly strong for so many years that, and I don't know if it's like, obviously some easy, hot take would be like, well, the leadership changed at AWS and then people leaving and things like that. Maybe that's what's going on. Or maybe it's just, they've just gotten to the point they're just a really, really big company that's still making tons of money and they're busy with other things. But as surprised as I am to say it, I'd say AWS has done, kind of the worst of those big three. And then we'll just sort of like, we'll have a sixth man award, someone coming off the bench. Oracle suddenly seems to like, they're making some noise and it looks like it's showing up in their earnings as well. I'm always super skeptical. I don't know. I feel like I've been burned with it, but like at some point the numbers are the numbers. So I've suddenly paid a little bit more attention to Oracle. So I don't know. That's my take. What do you see out there?
Yeah, I think I see the rankings sort of similar to yours. Microsoft somehow has figured out. I mean, like you said, like they're an A+ over the last year between just they sort of beat the market out there to AI in terms of partnerships. They have sort of figured out how to fix. I don't want to say fix their outages, but like people were like, I know they're good and I know that I trust them, but their cloud keeps having this weird things like the storage stinks or whatever. It feels like that's all sort of been muted down and haven't really had those issues lately. And Google. So here's my question with Google. Do you think Thomas Kurian somewhere on his wall has that, you ever gone into like a bar or a restaurant or a small business and they have that one single dollar and they're like, that's the first dollar we ever made. Do you think he has that on his wall? Like the first profitable dollar, like a little plaqued, framed up sort of thing?
Well, certainly he's got an award for the first profitable quarter. I'm without a doubt, and I'm sure that came with a huge check too. So for a bonus check for him. So yeah, without a doubt, I'm sure that was what he was told to do when he came in. Is you got to make this profitable. Well, so yeah, for sure, he's going to hang that. That's going to go in his bio for the rest of his career. First person to make Google Cloud profitable.
Well, and the thing about Google is, so the folks over there, like they had to be celebrating. They were like, we finally did it. We finally got profitable. We finally sort of getting over the hump. People are people are looking at us and like, oh, okay, we've gotten past whatever that date was when they said, well, if we're not number 2, we're killing this thing off. And like people had to be, pretty excited. And then they have to go and kill off Google domains. They sold it off to somebody, like all the goodwill they had built up. And it's funny because anybody who's associated with Google Cloud, like the systems integrators that are around them and so forth, they were all just like, I can't believe you did this. You took this little thing that people just assume just works. I mean, nobody ever thinks about Google domains other than being like, yeah, I'm going to go just do it. And I'm going to click yes. And I'm going to give you $9 a year or whatever it is. And you had to go and sell this thing off. You're like, how hard can it be to run DNS? I mean, I know DNS breaks, but it's like you do it at scale and they're just like, oh, we tried so hard to build a reputation.
It is, I don't know. It is sort of, it's impossible to cuts. Yeah, it's impossible to describe it. And also too, like, I mean, obviously, if any business sort of like helps Google proper as well as GCP, it's like, yeah, domains, like have everyone host their sites, create content, right? You just want everyone thinking like, if I think of the internet, whether on the consumer or the enterprise side, I want to think Google. And it's like, of all the things, and again, all the projects they keep going, you're like, I don't know. It is weird. It is funny that like, and of course it too, it just plays into the stereotype, but at some point it's like, I guess, the CFO, he must said, well, listen, you're profitable, but I need you to get rid of this. So it must have been some conversation like that must have gone down.
Right. Like there wasn't some other line item somewhere that someone in Google could have been like, all right, we're getting rid of that thing. Right?
Yeah. Like if I was
a car like, thing, a rocket thing, a something.
Isn't there a messaging service we can kill off? Isn't there like 3 of those over here that no one's using? So that would have been a funny conversation to hear.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I'm trying to figure out is I think you're right. Like AWS, it's so weird because AWS they were the golden child. Everybody was sort of lining up like they're invincible. They can't be beat. Amazon had become, and I think has still become like totally dependent on their profits. Right. And, every time you're like, that's the profit center that makes the most profits. And it's weird. Even the most diligent sort of fan people, like the Corey Quinns of the world. And Corey would, he would kind of feels like he would kind of jokingly poke at it. Like he's now openly like they're screwing stuff up. They're messing stuff up. They're doing this well. And, and it's like, I feel like the luster has sort of fallen off of AWS. I think their numbers are going to come out and we're going to be like, oh yeah, they're still kicking butt and they're still making a bunch of money. But you're right. It's like who's excited about AWS? And I feel like it's they lost some people. They really haven't come out with any new services. And probably the we haven't come out with any new services piece is like, hey, I just want to remind you guys, we did come out with 978 new services over the last couple of years, which most of you haven't caught up to yet. So cool. But you're right. Like some of it's just, I feel like some of it's just timing. Like Andy and the doctor guy, I forget what his last name is, would come out and talk about AI, like you said, for hours. And if they had done that this year, you'd have been like, oh, SageMaker is amazing. And all these things are amazing. But they did it 2 years ago, back when everybody was like, yeah, but I can't touch AI. I don't really know anything, like ChatGPT is not here. So I don't feel like I have my toes aren't in the water with AI. And they were just like 2 years early with stuff. And I feel like they're sort of now just dealing with the fact that they just overwhelmed the market for so long that now people have such expectations of them. And they're kind of like, I just want to remind you guys, like we're $100 billion business. There's only going to be so many new things that are like knock your socks off every year, but that's still okay. We're the cloud and we just run and blah, blah. And so, yeah, I feel like the luster's off them. I don't know that the numbers are necessarily so bad. I mean, they're off where they were, but I got to wonder, like, is Adam Selipsky come home and just be like, man, I thought I was signing up for the greatest job in the world. I thought I was signing up to be like the manager of the Yankees, or I was taking over Bill Belichick's job. And he's just like, I'm following the legend, and it's the worst timing possible. Like it couldn't be any worse timing for him to be taken over.
No, I totally agree there. And it's like every sports fans know, it's like, if you're a coach, never follow the legend. You always want to follow the person that follows the legend. I think we're seeing it there. Now, early prediction now for everyone listening. So maybe we'll say this one now. It's like, I'm expecting, I don't know exactly what, but I expect AWS reInvent Adam Selipsky to be locked and loaded. Like this has got to be you know what I mean? Like kind of back to sports analogy. It's like, this is going to be his big game. Like I got to think they are preparing as many announcements as we've ever seen, right? To come out and like really retake the mantle. So, it's July, it's kind of the doldrums, but I think those teams are buckled down, putting out services. And I really expect to see a major performance from him. And if we don't, I mean, then that would maybe be the first time where I'm like, maybe the leadership right, is going to change in some other way. Because it's just they've been way too quiet. And I think like if I know it and you know it, right. This conversation is going on inside AWS, and 6-page memos are being written, and operations meetings are happening, and this discussion's happening there for sure.
Yeah, this is when they're probably sitting there going, I really wish reInvent was in May, or I wish it was in June,
for sure,
because they're sitting like I feel like, and I don't know what all the shows are anymore. They're kind of hard to keep up with, but like I feel like there's been 3 or 4 Sundar Pichai keynotes over the last 3 or 4 months. I feel like there's been 2 or 3 from Satya Nadella, and I'm like, I didn't even know they had that many events, but like it feels like every month Microsoft and Google are doing some sort of announcements about stuff, and the Amazon folks have just got to be sitting there going like, they can't do a keynote at one of the mid-year shows. They have to do it at the end, and they're like, God, why does this thing have to be in November? Right? Like they got to be right. I got a feeling they're going to be doing, what we used to call like mega launches when I was at other companies. It was like everything's coming out at once. You're getting 100 announcements this year, whether you like it or not.
No, it's coming. It's definitely coming.
All right. So you talk about platform engineering a little bit on your list. We've done a couple of shows this year. They've probably been the most listened to, at least for the year, at least relatively for the year. It does feel like people are kind of re-engaged, re-excited about, what has been this thing that's been going on for a little while, which is like get all of your infrastructure teams, all of your deployment teams together in one group. We've now sort of named it platform engineering, which I think is probably a good thing, because when it was DevOps, I always felt like it was sort of like the dev was silent. It was really just ops. And I feel like platform engineering now is like, okay, all the people that are there to go, look, I run your platform, I build your cloud, I help you with deployments, but I'm not building the apps for you, are now sort of like re-engaged around like, okay, finally we've got this sort of right. Do you feel like this platform engineering has legs? It's going to be around for a while, or is this sort of an interim thing until, I don't know, the next thing comes along?
Well, I think that is literally the $1 billion question. But I think it's interesting to like kind of look how we got here. And I kind of look at the CNCF landscape, and I kind of think of it, just break it into 2 big categories. You sort of have like this like bastions of hundreds of projects, all kind of grouped by different functionality. And then you've got a few key platforms. So you've got the hyperscalers we just mentioned, and you've really got Red Hat, which of course I know, Brian, you're super familiar with, and then VMware Tanzu. And it's sort of like, I talk to customers all the time, and it's sort of like the question, if you just kind of think of that slide as the question that everyone's trying to answer, it's like, well, what do I do? Do I pick one of these hyperscalers or one of these core platforms and use that? Or do I then go through and pick out all the various projects and kind of build my own solution that kind of meets what has what I want? And I think that has sort of spawned platform engineering. And I think when you have a problem, you have to solve it, right? And I think that's sort of like people are sort of constrained by that grid. Like this is what we should be able to do it. And so that's where I think platform engineering is coming from. And if you were to just translate it in the most simplest terms, it's like, hey, we have to make sense of all this technology and figure out how we're going to run it. So that's kind of where we are. But I do think, people are acknowledging, I know you just recently did an interview with Adam Jacobs, so did we, from the Systems Initiative. And he's kind of got like kind of a 2.0 DevOps take going around like, hey, maybe we didn't get this right. And, you could go back further, right? You could go back to, our friends at OpenStack. And there's been many attempts, right, to kind of like, hey, let's put all this together and not make it a job of someone to kind of put a platform together. But they always, in the end, right, they kind of break down. They don't do what we want them to do, or new technology comes out. And so that's, I think, where we find ourselves. But it kind of sets ourselves up now for like, well, where are we going to go? Are we going to kind of like take this tech stack and make it all work? I know Kelsey Hightower, has kind of talked about like Kubernetes is 10 years old, and hopefully in 10 years, we're not talking about it. And that would mean that we sort of figure out the way to package this up correctly in a way that's real easy and consumable for people. Or, kind of maybe, Adam Jacobs' take, it's sort of like, do we need to step back and kind of rethink a lot of our core assumptions? And I think, you had a great Sunday conversation, recently talking about DevSecOps. And you talked about, have we shifted things too far left? And I was going to sort of ask you, it's sort of like kind of continuing your metaphor there was, I kind of think it's like, have we shifted everything to the margin? Like, has everything been shifted left to the point of like, everybody's in the same starting point, right? Like security, identity, operations, product management. And it's just sort of like, we're all trying to do everything simultaneously on this platform, and we're all kind of frustrated. And so maybe that's sort of opening up either a new way of doing things, or someone's going to have to really figure out how to package it all up. Like, what do you think's going on?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things I guess I like, and I think that worry me. So, I do like that I felt like DevOps kind of got fragmented, and it was sort of fragmented based on, were you a chef, a puppet, an Ansible, a salt person? Yes, there was some, it was sort of fragmented, and then it kind of got a little bit like, well, it's more about hugs and it's about feelings and it's about organization and less about technology. So people are always like, I'm not really sure where to wade into it. I do wonder, I feel like, and I think you highlighted, I feel like there's sort of two things going on right now, which is sort of weird. There's not really, like, if somebody said like, hey, our goal is to help developers deploy faster. And yes, we're kind of buying into this platform engineering concept, but like, what's the thing that we would kind of put together? Like, I don't feel like there's like a consistently defined lamp stack, if you will, for platform engineering. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, there's parts of it. Right. And I think most people would say like, well, Kubernetes is going to be in that stack somewhere, and there'll be some other stuff in there. Maybe it's a Prometheus or whatever it is. But I feel like beyond Kubernetes, you're looking at the CNCF landscape and you're like, all right, well, what other pieces go in there? And and the hard part about there not being sort of a lamp stack for it is, unlike a lot of things. So for example, like, if you were a VMware admin, which is, kind of one of the earlier genesis of what would become the platform engineering team. Like, let's say you were a VMware admin at Bank A in New York City, you could go across the street to Bank B and be like, oh yeah, I totally know all this stuff because I know all the tools they use. Or if you go to some other industry, whereas if you're like, oh yeah, our platform is based on these 10 different tools, like 6 of them might not be at your next job somewhere. And so like your learning curve starts over and whatever. And I think there's a huge opportunity for that community to go, like, we're going to try and build out 70 or 80%. Like, we're going to try and build a stack for 70 or 80% of it and kind of build some consensus. I know that's going to be weird because you've got different people that have different biases on things. And what worries me a little bit is the one foundational thing, which everybody kind of agreed to, which was Kubernetes. You now have this set of people, whether it's Kelsey or whether it's whoever, going like, oh, Kubernetes is boring. Let's figure out what's next. And you're like, God, right. that could be your foundation that you build on. But now you're like, oh, I'm bored with that. And I made a name for myself in Kubernetes. So let me figure out what the next thing is. And the next thing doesn't really exist yet. Like, there's not like this burgeoning, like, other thing that's not Kubernetes, but it's better than Kubernetes. That's the piece I'm like kind of interested in watching, because it's like, the concept of platform engineering, just like the concept of PaaS, is solid in its foundation, but the execution of it feels like it's still just super fragmented. And until that gets right, or we get bored with it, like I feel like the people who actually have to go live with platform engineering day in, day out, not some marketing person or somebody giving a keynote, like their skills are only partially transferable. And until there can be a lot of people that can just do it over and over again, it feels like everything is sort of a snowflake or a one-off, which worries me a little bit, just in terms of velocity.
Yeah, you hit a lot of good points. One thing sometimes in these situations, just try to look for other things in technology to see like what's happening and maybe analogies. And like one thing I've sort of kind of like been trying to learn up a little bit is the Rust programming language. And trust me, we won't make this a boring Rust programming language thing. But what I have noticed and like what I have seen is that more and more people building infrastructure are using it. So I kind of like took some time to be, well, why is that? And so like the short story is like, well, C and C++ for longest time have been sort of like, if you're going to write hardcore platform, packages and things like that, you want the power of C and C++. But of course, it's like really, really hard. Everyone makes mistakes and you can kill yourself with all these memory management issues. And so what's been interesting is Rust is sort of like, well, listen, the problem, and there's been many attempts to make C and C++ in itself is an attempt to make it simpler, but it really never got simpler. It was always just like, man, this is still really hard and you can still make mistakes. And so it's interesting, like, Rust has come along and they sort of said, we'll give you the performance of C and C++, but we're actually going to build into the compiler some really strict rules around memory that will let you do that, but it will also keep you from making mistakes. Now, you're going to have to live within those rules, but if you do, you're going to have a much better chance at building, if you will, bug-free products. And I think that's kind of like my question, like to your point about Kubernetes, is like, we have all of this technology and all of these projects in many ways. And I think we're going to talk about cloud cost management in a second, right? It's sort of like trying to make what we have better. Let me add on like, C to C++. Let me add another package. Let me put out another set of best practices on how to write good C code, right? Whereas sometimes in the case of Rust being an example here, it's sort of like, hey, if you go back and rethink it from the ground up, you can actually build in kind of all the checks. And if that gets widespread adoption, it makes things easier. So that's kind of what I think about platform engineering. I'm like, are we going to, out of this, are we going to still continue to kind of build our own platforms, or will the right packaging and technology come together so we don't have to do so much of this work?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it's that may be the keynote. That may be your keynote for KubeCon. Like it'll be Krusternetes because everything, everything has to be with a K. Will Krusternetes 2.0, be the next big thing in Kubernetes? And maybe that's what they needs to do. It needs to be, because everything 5 years ago was like, oh, it's all written in Go. It came out of Google. All these things are written in Go, and now Go is sort of passe, and Rust is a thing. And yeah, I never understand. I'm ignorant. I read all the Red Monk things about like, here's the language stuff. Like I never understand like the language things, because I'm not writing code, so I don't understand the nuances of it. But I do appreciate how passionate people are, that they're like, I invented a new language that will always solve all of the problems.
Well, I think, maybe just a quick aside on that, we'll kind of say, so Rust is sort of one example of like, hey, we're going to try to make this C++ problem go away. And so everyone can go read about it. Now, on the other side, right, I think this other thing is emerging. So, everyone is a Python programmer, me included, because it's like really super easy to learn. And like, probably if you have kids and they're like doing something in school, they're learning Python. And so another project has emerged, this thing called Mojo, from this guy, Chris Latner, famous for writing like Swift and things like that. But like his take on the whole thing was really interesting. Like, it's going to be super obvious what I said, but he's like, well, I built a lot of different programming languages. I'm really interested in AI, but what I learned was like everybody loves Python. And so he's sort of, Mojo is basically a superset of Python, and it's going to let you like run Python really, really fast. And I think like that kind of thinking, right, is like kind of interesting. We're like, listen, I'm not changing everybody. I got to build better tooling for what people want to use. And I think we can apply that kind of this platform engineering and DevOps, and to your point about VMware admins and stuff like that. Listen, we can tell everybody to change and like, have the meetings about DevOps and, try to implement the culture and change all of these things. But to some extent, it would be better if we could kind of meet people where they are, right? What are the tools that they like? How do we give them tools and a platform that doesn't let them make so many mistakes, right? Like all of us have problems with security and all these things. So like, what can we build into it? So that's the exciting kind of thing, that people are at least trying to do it. Now, much easier said than done, right? And again, I hate to say it, like writing a programming language is actually probably easier than coming up with a cloud native platform that everyone agrees on. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. And I appreciate the boldness, having talked to Adam, like, Adam Jacobs' show came out, I think this is today or whenever we recorded this. I do appreciate the folks who did it before and have the, I guess, sort of confidence to be like, yeah, I'm okay admitting the thing I built 10 years ago may not be what we need 10 years later. And I'm willing to sort of start from scratch and listen a little bit, not reinvent the wheel, not do those sort of things. So yeah, I do appreciate the boldness of somebody knowing that like you're going to get the slings and arrows of being like, oh, okay, yet another person starting over. But sometimes when you know stuff really, really well and you're like, no, these are the things that we just can't repeat going forward. Like I have a deep appreciation for those folks. Let's shift gears a little bit. A lot of talk about cloud cost management. We've joked a little bit that like every company at KubeCon is a cloud cost management company in one way, shape, or form. We've been fortunate to have some really good sponsors like Cloud Zero have been helping us learn about that stuff. Do you feel like this kind of new trend of cloud cost management is people being like, holy crap, we moved a lot of stuff to the public cloud. That seemed like a really good idea. And now we're realizing that like just having sort of like ongoing IT costs that we now get a bill for every month are crazy? Or do you feel like this is going to be a thing that CFOs and other groups are going to go, hey, how about we just like don't do the spending up front in the public cloud? Let's keep more stuff on-prem. Like, where do you see the yin and yang of, control costs in the public cloud versus just like don't put stuff in the public cloud shaking out because of this new visibility we have with cool tools for the 10,000 line bill?
Yeah, I mean, lots of good questions in there. I think, when we kind of think about it, like my overall take is just sort of like, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate we need it. I mean, I know we've had a bunch of companies do it, but I get where everyone's coming from. And I do think, maybe using the consumer analogy here, it's like, remember like Mint.com came out and it's like, at some point, like everyone just needs to like see like, where are we spending our money? And it's just too complicated today when you mix public cloud and the private cloud and all the different things together. So I get it. I understand why it's come about, but I do kind of feel like, to me, it feels like this should be features of other products. And I think what we're going to see, kind of back to some of our talk about the economy, is that a few of these that I think that actually, achieve some type of adoption will likely be bought up pretty quickly. And I think, packaged with larger platforms, because I think that's kind of how you want it, right? I don't think you have to want to go out and like buy a whole separate product just to manage your costs. Now, I know those companies would say, well, that's their advantage, right? They're sort of like the unbiased, if you will, referee looking at all of the different things. But going forward, I mean, I think another thing you mentioned about it was like there was a lot of talk last year about like people moving back from the public cloud to the private cloud. I think I've said a lot on that subject, but I think generally that hasn't really happened. And I just think it comes down to like, all of us are trying to understand more about where we're spending our money. Obviously, with the economy, maybe it's still going to grow, but CFOs are more interested in it. So all of these tools are, I think, sort of just a point in time. It's just like it was time for them to be built out. And I think, everyone's building out beautiful dashboards. And I think they're going to have their time in the sun here. But I would guess in the next, say 18 months to 24 months, most of them will be bought up and, packaged together in other products. Or maybe some of them probably will decide we just don't need it all.
Yeah, no, I think that's the logical conclusion. I think we'll end up seeing. I know you guys did a big show around observability and monitoring and stuff. I figure that just becomes a feature. There's a bunch of companies that do interesting stuff around cloud cost management, but at some point, I think we're all, we can say the quiet part out loud, which is like, yeah, it's a feature. It should be part of your platform. It should be part of your monitoring platform. There should be ways at this point where we can sort of model what certain applications look like, and you should be able to have some sense up front of like, okay, well, this is going to roughly cost this. Just build it in the same way that you would for other sort of planning and stuff. Because at some point, it was the interesting thing. Like it goes back to this thing that I sort of learned the hard way. For example, like when Google Cloud first came out, they were adamant that their pricing was different because they were like, oh, we just build pricing discounts in. Everybody hates doing negotiation with vendors, and we just kind of build pricing discounts in. So the more you use the platform, the prices just sort of go down automatically. And I thought like, oh, that's really cool. That's really innovative of Google. And like, yeah, they're kind of taking that, like the thing you hate about like having to negotiate for a car out of the picture. I'm like, that's so smart. And then as I talked to people who lived in the sort of cost management world, they're like, yeah, that sounds really cool, but CFOs and project managers hate it because they have no idea what the cost of things are going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
So like a lot of the stuff that you think like sound really cool and like are interesting from a technology perspective, and then you deal with the folks who are like, oh no, I have to keep the spreadsheet of the budget and stuff, and I would actually like to know in advance what it's going to look like. I've got to do budgeting for next year, or I've got to, and you're like, okay, like certainty and visibility and all those things are almost more important than some coolness factor when it comes to the budget. So yeah, I suspect we will see a bunch of those companies because, like I said, there's probably too many of them. I don't want to say which ones there are too many of, but yeah, I think they become features of other hopefully prominent platforms, whether it's a VMware or a Red Hat or an AWS or whatever. It would be interesting, probably be like a day 3 sort of announcement. But to see AWS just sort of announce that they're proactively putting this stuff in, they do that weird, like, oh, we put some, helpers in the bill, but you're like, no, not really. Cause still Corey's really visible about stuff, but yeah, that would be an interesting one, or Microsoft or somebody else doing that.
Well, you got to think it's got to be on the list of possible AWS reInvent announcements. So we'll watch for that.
AI for pricing.
Hey, listen, you said it. I think the press release has been written. I think it's, can they build something? I think that's a good prediction.
All right. We've gone however many minutes we've gone. We haven't really talked about AI yet, or at least let's wrap it around sort of the enterprise, right? Because everybody is talking about ChatGPT. It is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I've been around this industry for a long time. Like the newsletters and the people who have, built up a following on Twitter that are like, well, in the last 7 days, there have been 87,000 new AI applications built. Let me tell you the top 10. You're like, holy crap, is that for real?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how much of that is real. I don't know how many of those are just complete copycat stuff that some bot built. But from an enterprise perspective, because you and I sort of live on the enterprise side, like what stuff sort of immediately jumps out at you, and what stuff do you feel like we will be talking about in 6 months or 9 months that'll be more kind of enterprise relevant? Because right now it feels like a lot of ChatGPT, which jobs will ChatGPT replace? What part of my job can I just do easily with ChatGPT? Like it feels very that centric, but I think there's obviously a much, much bigger picture we need to look at.
Yeah. So I kind of think of it as kind of like three phases. I think you kind of talked about it already, the consumer phase, right? And I think that has been on the enterprise technology side. I think for sure, if you or anyone, Brian, you talked about like, maybe you don't write code every day, but it's like, man, it's awesome to go in there and ChatGPT to like teach you how to like build some Python or Rust or whatever. I mean, that has been amazing. So I think we've all kind of done that, and we've seen that, and everyone's sort of there, right? And then I think we even mentioned this a little bit on that Jamin episode a while back, was sort of like, I feel like every enterprise vendor has announcing a co-pilot for everything, like a co-pilot for configuring Kubernetes, a co-pilot for email, a co-pilot for data analytics. So in the interim, it's sort of like all of these incremental features and making existing enterprise software technology easier. I think that is all on everyone's roadmap. It's being actively developed, and I think that will just continue on. Now, and I think, because you kind of talked about it before, like, so many influencers doing it. And I think that's one thing that's maybe changed between 2000 and now is like, we are just collectively, I think, so primed to like recognize the emergence of a new platform and everyone run to it to like try to make money. It's like everyone lived through the iPhone and was like, you know what I should have built? I should have built an iPhone app, right? And like missed it. And it's like every time a platform jumps up, it's like everyone rushes towards it, which is fine. I mean, it's good, but it's just sort of, it's super competitive, right? There isn't like any white space left, right? If you will, inside of all of these AI things. And I think as we go forward, the parts that I'm interested in is sort of like, what are the products that just literally could not exist without AI before that people are just maybe now, kind of trying to think about? So, for example, like instead of Copilot for Excel or Copilot for Snowflake or whatever, really what I want to do is just put all this data in there and just start asking questions, right? And I want to basically have that available to anyone in my enterprise. And nobody has to learn the schema, the table, whatever. I just want to say, like, how many customers did we have in Brazil last month? Or like, what was our net margin? Like, that's the kind of stuff where I think it's harder, right? Because you're going to have to figure out, like, well, can AI even do all of that? But I think if we kind of think about it, that's where we want to get to. And that will create, I think, significant differentiation. If you are, I'm just using data analytics as the one example. I think Salesforce is the other one, right? It's like, Salesforce, love it, hate it, right? Kind of relationship. Like you're inside Salesforce, you can just never get what you want out of it. Like an AI for me to like understand what's happening in my business and not have to learn all these enterprise tools. And a phrase I like to use is like, sometimes many of these enterprise applications, hide data from the rest of the organization, right? Like you have to know somebody to give you access, and then you have to actually have the skills to use that tool. And it's like, wow, could we get to a point where it's like all of this information? And I like to, I kind of like half jokingly, right? It's like everyone has like a quarterly business review or a monthly business review. And it's like you cut and paste all these charts into PowerPoint, and then you go through them with the executives. And it's like, wouldn't it be great if the executive could just like ask, or all of us could just ask these questions throughout the quarter? Like, what's going on? So that's the part that I'm, interested in. Like, can any of these things I just talked about come to fruition? And will that ultimately actually provide, the kind of value that's just completely new, right? That we just couldn't do before. We never thought about that. We always thought about tables and reports. Now we have a place to just ask questions. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about would be exciting. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. It was funny. You guys did an episode a couple of weeks ago that was like, everybody talks about, having data lakes internally and Salesforce access and all that stuff. And then it ends up getting narrowed down to like, well, these 10 people are important enough to have a seat, or right. Or more importantly, it's like, yeah, well, we can't afford more than 10 seats, right? Like we'd love to give people access, but and our company values are transparency, but we can't afford to give you more than 10 seats, or we can't afford to pull in these 6 other data sources because that would require all these integrations and somebody to maintain it. It'll be really interesting. I think you're right. Like the beauty that everybody likes about their initial experience now that AI has like a user interface, i.e. ChatGPT or whatever it is you don't have to think about any of the data. You're just like, well, apparently it has the whole internet in there, or at least up till 2021 or whatever it does, right? Like it has sort of a little bit of everything. And you're like, I didn't have to ask anybody for permission. I didn't have to ask anybody to like run a report for me. And, for now it's all quote unquote free, aside from, somebody paying billions in GPUs to sort of make all this work and blah, blah, blah. And it'll be really interesting to see if people can figure out, like you said, it would be nice if you were a manager or you were a whatever to be like, I want to have these sort of questions sort of open-ended sitting there. And I don't want to ask them like one time. I want to ask them like to be like, hey, AI system, I need you to just kind of keep track of trends for me. And when they, let's build some models of what trends look like. And then when they start getting weird, just notify me. Let me know. I don't want to keep looking through reports every day. I don't want to be doing this. And it's going to be like, well, we'd like to do that for you, Brandon, but you've exceeded your data quota for the month, or you've exceeded your integration limit for the month, or you've exceeded, and you're just like, and it makes you wonder, we've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, well, if we have the burden of too much data holds us back, then we have the Splunk problem. Like people like Splunk, but Splunk, charges you based on how much data you have, so people hate Splunk. Or it's the Salesforce, like, oh, we charge you by seats and the seats are expensive. And so not everybody has access to it. And we get around that in the internet because it's like, oh, well, we have access to Google, but that charges because of ads. So we don't pay for it, but somebody pays for it. And I wonder how the enterprise model ever works out, because there's only so many levers it has to pull. It's like the number of users or the amount of data or the number of integrations you have. It makes you wonder if we're going to get to a point where like a Microsoft plus OpenAI, and you're just going to kind of go, I know we have all this corporate data, but God, I can't get anything out of this corporate data. So I'm just going to figure out, I can't imagine we're going to go very many years without, OpenAI or Microsoft plus OpenAI or OpenAI plus Google going like, oh no, we have this isolated sandbox thing for you. Like there's a way for us to do like multi-tenancy where you get all the benefits of it, and we have different ways to monetize it. And it's not it's just not a big silo. Like that's the piece I kind of wonder. I think in the interim, you're right. There's going to be a million cool things you can build and bots you can build and stuff you can build. But in the big picture of things, if you look at it from an enterprise perspective, not consumer perspective, I wonder if this isn't the same economic, I'm curious how the economics change. That to me is the most interesting piece, because we already know that surfacing this stuff is ridiculously expensive, right? We're seeing articles about shortages of GPUs, and Nvidia stock is up to $1 trillion now. And people are, Microsoft is doing these one-off partnerships with Nvidia's competitor because they're I can't even get access to enough GPUs or TPUs. Yep. The cost of this stuff behind the scenes is ridiculous. And it's they're going to have to monetize it at some point. And who's going to get it? Who's going to get access to those seats? All that stuff I wonder about. That may be the conference that we need to start is you guys were joking around about it, but that seems like a pretty interesting set of discussions to have there somewhere. It's we have this powerful technology, but we don't use it. It's sort of
and I think
nuclear energy to a certain extent.
I totally agree.
Everybody's afraid of it.
Yeah. And I, just to kind of pick up a couple, things to kind of pick up on there. It's one today, people don't think of it this way, but what is ChatGPT today in the enterprise? And I would make the argument it's email, because I'm sure you both send and get these emails, Brian. It's sort of do we have any references for the financial industry for our for this upcoming sales presentation? And I bet you somebody emails you that, or you ask someone that, or do we have the numbers for last week? And so what it is, if you think about what are we doing as white collar workers, a lot of times it's sort of finding information, possessing information, and then packaging it up for somebody else in a way that's easy for them to consume, right? And that's, and if you think about it, that's we none of us want to. And then same thing with status reports. It's I actually don't really care what you did this week, Brian. What I actually care about is did something happen that I need to know about, right? That's really what I'm asking you. So if you think about, could we have an AI, and could we start to ask these types of questions in the enterprise so that it's less emails, it's less chat, it's less just random stuff on the intranet? And then your point about the cost is I think this is a place where In the short term, sure, I get why everybody wants their own GPU. But if you look at NVIDIA specifically, their stock goes through this like every 10 years, right? Yeah. There's like this huge trend. And there's a great episode of the Acquired podcast. You can listen to it and they outline it. It's like, oh, we got to have it for games. But then it gets good enough that like, okay, the GPUs are pretty good, right? And it's like you can play your games in 4K. And I think what's going to happen here is we're going to see this initial investment and building all these models, but there's going to be some diminishing returns. You already see the open source stuff. Like I think it's called Hugging Face. I'm not an expert in it, but like, you know, these public models are going to be like good enough to use without much additional training. And then I think suddenly like we probably won't need to train them as much. And then what you just mentioned before would be like, how do I take something like Hugging Face, which I don't know, ridiculous name. I didn't name it. You know, you basically, how do I deploy it inside of our enterprise? And how do I just put all of our data in there? And how do we build this kind of interesting chat interface that lets us get away from doing status reports and MBRs and actually having this real-time information to data? Because if you started to do that, you would then think, one, your costs would go way down. And two, all the executives that want to have these meetings, they could just ask these questions and make their decisions kind of at their leisure, right? We don't have to wait for the weekly QBR. Just, you know, get the report every day like you were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's there is a huge story that's much bigger than our new sort of fascination with GPT, you know, with Chat GPT or the price of NVIDIA and stuff. So yeah, lots and lots of interesting angles around this stuff. We have been going now for 45 plus minutes. I think we've covered the big things. Let's do this just, you know, so the guy who needs to pull off and, you know, get some food for the kids while his vacation or, you know,
that's right.
Go refresh the cooler or something, has a reason to get up. Last question. Any early, either big surprises that you're sort of surprised this year or sort of, you know, second half predictions for the year. So things you might see happen second half of the year or just, you know, something obscure that sort of has surprised you so far this year.
Yeah, so a couple things I'll just say. I was more like things I'm watching for the rest of the year, and we'll keep them kind of brief. Like one, we already mentioned AWS reInvent. I think that's the Adam Selipsky show. I'm never going to learn how to say his last name, but like we're expecting big things. If big things don't happen, I think that's going to be interesting. The other thing that I'm watching closely, partially from my day job, but also just in the industry as well, looks like Broadcom is going to finally close this VMware acquisition. As of today, they're saying it's going to close in August. And the reason I think that's so interesting is like there's been a lot of talk about what Broadcom may do, but for all of us listening, most of the workloads still today I would argue, live in some type of VMware, you know, vSphere, software. So if Broadcom, you know, does anything that sort of, if you will, incents people to leave VMware, that is going to trigger just a massive amount of activities, whether it's the hyperscalers, other platform vendors, everyone trying to figure out how to help the quote unquote VMware customer adopt something new. And I have no inside information. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. Are they going to continue to invest in Tanzu? Are they going to continue to invest in the VMware portfolio? There are typically cutbacks after these acquisitions. So who's cut? How people leave, what do they go do? So I just think the second half of the year, I have a big question mark around what does VMware do, what happens, and what does the market kind of take away? Will that lead to lots of different migrations? So I've got that one. And then the final one is really not technology related, but I thought I mentioned it anyway. It was just sort of like, I've just found this whole return to office dialogue. I don't know. I'm calling it like the white collar resistance. I thought for sure it's like, well, as someone who's worked from home, I think it worked fine. But then the pandemic happened and it was threat of a recession. I was like, well, looks like everyone's going back to the office, but it turns out not that many people want to go back. So there's been a lot of issues with companies like getting people to go back to the office. So I'm wondering, like, does the resistance die? Is everyone just finally go back to the office when they're called, or do the companies just give up? And are we left with some type of hybrid work at home environment going forward? So I just think that's a fun topic. It doesn't really affect me in any way, but I just like to watch the discourse happen around it.
Yeah, we may have to get some folks together who've both, you know, done remote for a long time, which I know is a bunch of us, and some folks who don't. Well, maybe we'll do a roundtable or a Sunday perspective on that one. I think you're right. That one deserves its own, you know, whys and why nots, and what's possible and what's stupid. And I think you're right. I think the most fascinating thing, and it might seem small in scope, but you know, what if the Broadcom thing happens? And quite honestly, like, I've almost completely forgotten about VMware over the last year or so. Not out of spite or any other reason, but just like like I sort of was like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I felt like everybody at VMware I talked to was like kind of in the, kind of bummed out because they were like, oh man, we're getting bought by another company. We were free for like a minute and then we weren't. But I do think it's going to be interesting because what was really weird, it was, and this is maybe the weird part of the first half of the year, was the number of calls I would get from like financial analysts, because like I'll periodically get calls and they'll be like, hey, what do you think's going on here? Or explain this stuff to me. Was the number of them that was like, so what is VMware and Broadcom? What are they going to be able to do to integrate VMware software with Broadcom hardware? And like that was the angle they were all taking. Like they're like, there's got to be synergies between these things. There's no way they're just buying them for software. And I was like, I don't think that's what it is, but maybe you guys have some leaked documents or whatever. I think my guess is there's going to be just a whole new set of people vying to be kind of the premier partner for VMware. Like I would not be surprised if part of, the second after Adam Selitsky gets done with the 500 AI announcements they make, that there will be a big VMware announcement. Like I got to imagine there people are looking at it and they're going, of all the things that are just cash cows in our industry that aren't going away. And like you said, people have tried to displace VMware. It's really hard to do, at least on the VM side of things. Like I got to imagine between VMware or between AWS and Azure, they're both like, I want to be your best friend. There's got to be some way to get you guys more tightly involved with us. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be the most compelling. Like, what happens? What do they lay out on day one? Because the day it was announced, it was like, hey, we are going to cut every single part of VMware that's not vSphere. And people were like freaking out. I think they're going to be coming back being like, we love all of our children. We love them. We're adopting some more children. I think it's going to be a very different tone that comes out after this thing. But I'm curious to see what it's going to be, because it does put Broadcom in a really weird position of being like, we had figured out this business model. We had figured out this economic model. We were buying assets, and then we were, and I feel like they're like, uh-oh, I'm stuck. Like I can't do that. And well, that'll be really interesting to see. So, all right, man, we've covered a lot. Where can folks find you at Software Defined Talk? If you're not already listening, what's the best way to find what you and Matt and Cote do week in and week out?
Well, you hit it. Go to softwaredefinedtalk.com. And more importantly, right now in your podcast player, go subscribe to it. It's if you like this show, you'll like Software Defined Talk. Very similar stuff, probably less, more nonsense, but still good. And then for all the Cloudcast listeners, I want all of you to come join the Software Defined Talk Slack, not just because I'm there, because Brian and Aaron, there's a whole Cloudcast channel in there, lots of Cloudcast listeners. So if you want to track down Brian, you want to like give him suggestions, you can find them in the Slack. And there's plenty of channels that are not talking about technology. There's a channel for everyone in the Software Defined Talk Slack. So come join us. We'd love to hear from you. And again, really appreciate you having me on the show today.
Yeah, man. Good times. Glad to have you back. And folks, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Whenever you're listening to this one, whether it's on vacation, part of your regular dog walking, whatever it might be. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the show. Thanks to Brandon for giving us an hour of his time. And with that, we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.